From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about the 71 different lake captains that lived in Bayview, Wisconsin during the age of sail and steam from 1878 to 1968. This video is sponsored by the historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. Now today, I'm standing in front of the former home. Actually, not this one behind me you see closest, but one you can't see, which is the house behind this one, directly behind it. That's the former home, at least as best I can tell. That is the former home of Bayview Lake Captain, a fisherman named Charles Tessler. Just as a reminder, the International Shipmasters Association at the time considered fishermen to be lake captains, and justifiably so. Charles was born in Prussia. He immigrated with his parents to Jones Island, which those of you that live in Bayview, know a little bit about the history, know that that was the place where basically all the fishermen lived. Now, while he was there, he was 18 years old, working for his father in the fishing business, going out on fishing boats to their fishing grounds 20 miles out into the lake. It wasn't along shore, and they did this year-round. Imagine going out into the middle of Lake Michigan, maybe not the middle, but quite a ways out, in the middle of January. No, thank you. But these guys did it. They were brave and courageous and strong, let me tell you. So, but this, at 18, he's ashore and he sees a sailboat get blown over by the wind, not too far offshore, hops in his sailboat, little sloop, I don't think it was his, it just happened to be there, sails out and rescues, saves the life just in the nick of time, according to their testimony, 2 of the 3 people he saved at 18. And this was witnessed by everybody standing on the shoreline. So, pretty spectacular. And then after that, he was working on a fishing boat at anchor, and it got rammed by a schooner. He survived just because a piece of wood happened to be nearby that he could grab onto. But his fellow crewman, Charles Renford, might have been captain, not sure. Charles Renford Sr., the father of a Bayview Lake captain, Charles Renford Jr., was thrown into the water and drowned. Incidentally, I have a separate episode, either coming up or after, on Charles Renford Jr. Lived down South Shore Drive, a little further down this way. And he drowned in the exact same spot his father did when he was washed overboard when he was out fishing. Neither of the bodies were ever recovered. Now, Jones Islanders were evicted right around the First World War, a little bit later. And that's when Charles Tessler moved their house up here to Bayview. So, he not only moved to Bayview, but he moved his house. How they got it up that hill down there, I don't know, but they did. And it's not this one, the one behind by my research. And I could be wrong, but. And the family lived there for 67 years after he moved in. While he lived in this house, he also was in an accident where his little tiny fishing boat out on the lake got rammed, sideswiped by a car ferry coming in, and he survived. One story I forgot to mention before coming to Bayview, the most significant of his life, when he was on Jones Island. Their fishing boat, the engine, they're 20 miles out in the lake. I think it's March, freezing cold. And the boiler fails. Now they've got no way to boil the steam to power the turbine to turn the propeller to make the boat go. And they're stranded out in the lake. They survived, but I'm not going to tell you that story because it's coming up in the narration by Simon Stanhope. Needless to say, miraculous. When they sailed back in to port, the whole ship was covered in ice. It looked like a giant ice cube. Anyway, that's Charles Tessler. His son crewed for him for many years and also lived here. I've got a separate episode coming up on Richard Tessler, his son. I'll be doing that one next. But for now, enjoy. Bayview had some pretty significant fishermen. There were lake captains living amongst us here, and Charles Tessler was no exception. So, hats off to our Bayview lake captains, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today we will be discussing the life of Captain Carl Charles Tessler, who was a third-generation fisherman on Jones Island, before moving to Bayview to continue captaining his fishing boat when all Jones Islanders were evicted from the island after World War I. He moved his house from Jones Island to Bayview when this occurred. Involved in numerous accidents and mishaps, while a Great Lakes fisherman and Bayview lake captain, he showed tremendous determination and courage that ranks near the top of all 71 Bayview lake captains. His career on the lakes totaled 55 years. His son, Richard, also became a Bayview lake captain and lived in the same house in Bayview with his father on South Shore Drive for over 2 decades. Captain Carl Charles Tessler, a third-generation fisherman, was born in Prussia in 1866. Prussia later evolved into what we know today as Germany after a series of wars in the mid-19th century consolidated 39 separate German-speaking states into one Germany. He immigrated via New York's Ellis Island to Milwaukee in 1882, aged 16. His father, August, was a Prussian fisherman, as was his grandfather. His mother's name was Dorothea. He went by Charles, and had one brother, Albert, and 3 sisters, Anna, Hattie, and Martha. Charles became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 1890. About the same year he immigrated, 1882, August Tessler settled the family on Jones Island, joining the more than 500 families that were already part of the fishing community there. As August resumed working as a fisherman, he raised his 2 sons, Charles and Albert, to follow him into that profession. They thus became the 3rd generation of Tesslers to become fishermen. August and his sons began fishing from a rowboat, in 1882, until they saved up enough money for a sailboat or fishing sloop in 1883. They used this to fish for the next 15 years, its name unknown. Then, in 1898, they transitioned to a steam-powered fishing boat, also known as a fish tug. It was the same season they bought the fishing sloop, in 1883, that Charles used it as a teenager to perform a heroic and stellar life-saving rescue, all on his own, out on Lake Michigan. At dusk, on 23rd October 1883, Charles, age 17, was out alone, just offshore of Milwaukee, in Lake Michigan, in the family fishing sailboat, when he saw another sailboat capsize. He immediately sailed over to the capsized boat as fast as he could. Jones Island villagers had seen the boat capsize, and a crowd began to gather on the shore. All 3 of the men in the capsized sailboat were Jones Island residents. Tessler was first on the scene. A life-saving crew and the tugboat Maxon were also on their way, but weren't going to make it in time. Charles Tessler pulled up next to 2 of the 3 men and pulled them from the freezing water and big waves, just as they were about to expire. Charles then saw the 3rd man was a bit further away, and sailed over to get him out of the water too. As Tessler's boat got close, the man reached out his hand to grab the rail, but missed by 6 inches. Before Charles could get his hand, the man slipped beneath the waves, never to be seen again. 7 years later, on 12th June 1890, at age 27, Charles Tessler barely survived the ramming and sinking of the fishing sloop Seabird, on which he was serving as a crewman. It's unknown if the Seabird was the Tesslers' family fishing sailboat, or if it belonged to fellow Jones Islander Charles Rempford, Sr., but it was likely the latter, since Charles Rempford was the captain. Of additional interest, Rempford was Charles Tessler's father-in-law at the time of this accident, having married Charles Rempford's daughter 5 years earlier in 1892. The Seabird was at anchor when out of nowhere it was rammed by the schooner Fearless. Both Tessler and Rempford were thrown into the water by the collision. A few minutes later, the Seabird sank. Both men tried to stay afloat as best they could. Tessler got hold of some floating wood from the wreck, but Rempford was not so fortunate, and a few minutes later he drowned. His body was never recovered. Tessler was subsequently picked up by another fishing sloop, the Johnny. Charles Rempford, a Jones Island fisherman for 20 years, left behind a wife and 4 children, with a 5th on the way. This unborn child would be named after him as Charles Jr., and would also grow up to become a Jones Island fisherman. When Charles Jr. was evicted with all the other islanders from Jones Island, right after World War I, Charles Jr. moved to Bayview, where he continued fishing and became a Bayview Lake captain. In 1935, Bayview Lake Captain Charles Rempford, Jr. would, like his father, also drown. Incredibly, Charles Jr.'s drowning occurred at the exact same location his father had drowned at 45 years before. He was washed overboard, and also, like his father, his body was never recovered. As Charles Jr. was drowning, he would have known he was nearing the fate of his father, whom he was named after, but had never met. In 1898, Charles Tessler's father, August Tessler, joined with his sons to buy a built-in Milwaukee steam-powered fishing boat. He named the AAC Tessler, the AAC likely standing for August, Albert and Charles, then later replaced it, 7 years later, in 1905, with the steam-driven Tessler, sometimes referred to as the Tessler II. For the entirety of this episode, we will refer to this fishing boat as the Tessler. Of interest, the AAC Tessler was sold in 1905 to the Smith brothers of Port Washington. The next year, specifically 18th March 1906, it was used by the Smith brothers to rescue and transport to and from the safety of Port Washington the 61 crew and passengers aboard the steamship Atlanta that had caught fire and subsequently sank. This is after the Tessler family of Jones Island had sold it, however. Charles first appears as a lake captain in 1898 of the AAC Tessler. In 1908, Charles's son Richard came aboard, at age 14, to work as crew on the Tessler, in addition to Charles's father August. So, for just this 1 year only, 1908, this made 3 generations of Tesslers, grandfather August, father Charles, and son Richard, all serving together at the same time as fishermen aboard the same fishing boat. Richard Tessler, the 4th generation of Tessler family fishermen, going back to his great-grandfather in Prussia, would crew for his father Charles aboard their family fishing boat, the Tessler, for 30 years, through 1937. When his father Charles became ill that year and had to retire, Richard took over as captain of the Tessler, thus becoming a Bayview Lake captain himself. A separate episode about Captain Richard Tessler is coming up soon on this channel. In 1909, August Tessler, Charles's father, died at age 79. His sons, Charles and Albert, took over as co-owners of the family fishing boat Tessler. Charles became its captain, with brother Albert serving as engineer in charge of keeping the steam engine and all associated machinery, like steering gear, operating. They would maintain this working relationship as captain and engineer of the Tessler for nearly 3 decades. It was the 2nd of March, 1913, 4 years after Charles and Albert became owner of the family fishing boat Tessler. Both brothers, as well as Charles's son and future Bayview Lake captain Richard Tessler, plus 3 other crewmen were aboard. On this day, they would all have perhaps their greatest brush with death, and certainly their most miraculous escape from it in all their lives. Though this was 6 years before Charles moved to Bayview, the story is spectacular and perhaps most indicative of the dangers faced each day by Bayview's lake captains as they set sail. The event is so amazing and incredible that a dedicated episode about it will be coming up in the future on this channel. Summarizing, Charles, Albert, and Richard Tessler, along with the 3 other crewmen, were out fishing on Lake Michigan on 2nd March 1913. They were 30 miles out into the lake, in their normal fishing grounds, when the boat's boiler that produced the steam to power the engine began to malfunction. It was 1 p.m., and all of the nets had just been hauled in when the wind began to pick up force. Charles Tessler, as captain, decided it was time to head back to Jones Island and turned the boat west. Just as he began to increase the speed, the engine stopped altogether. Charles dropped the anchor to try and stabilize the boat amidst the growing waves. Then they all got to work to try to fix the boiler that was needed to make the steam to provide power. The wind kept increasing, and the temperature kept dropping. Waves started to go over the top of the boat. Ice began to form on its exterior. Another casualty when the boiler failed was that not only would they not be able to power the boat to get back to port, but there was also no heat inside the cabin, as the temperature plummeted to 7 degrees below zero. 3 hours passed while they tried to fix the boiler from inside the boat, but no luck. It was now 4 o'clock in the afternoon and dark outside. The wind had now reached gale force levels of nearly 70 miles per hour. The fishing boat's anchor continued to hold. But with no heat, the crew's fingers now began to freeze, making continued working on the boiler near impossible. They all realized that if they didn't get heat, and fast, they would slowly freeze to death. Fortunately, the floor of the tiny interior where the men now all huddled together was made of concrete, and they decided to make a fire. Between them, they had just 3 matches. They cut slivers of wood from the cabin bulkhead and piled it together on the floor. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 matches were used in failed attempts, as the wood they'd assembled was wet and wouldn't light. Now they were down to their last match. Then one of the crewmen remembered he had a candle in his coat pocket, placed there the night before, when he lit it to go down into the basement of his father-in-law's saloon to get a bottle of whiskey. At the same time, Charles Tessler remembered there was a small telephone book aboard in his locker, so he went and got it. They tried the fire again, this time with the candle able to provide steady heat from their last match, and the dry paper from the phone book providing a reliable ignition source. The fire took off, and they all got warm. After Charles's brother Albert succeeded in jury-rigging a new plug to fix a broken seal, Charles's son Richard and another crewman volunteered to go outside to pull water from the lake and pour it into the boiler's filler cap that was on top of the boat's exterior. This would require them to go out into the 7 below zero weather with its gale-force winds. What they hadn't planned on, though, was that as soon as they got outside the cabin, they realized the entire exterior of the boat was now covered in a sheet of ice. They were both nearly tossed over the side a couple of times, to certain death in the huge waves, but were able to hold on to rails mounted on the boat's superstructure, and made it along the side to reach the boiler hatch. For 4 hours, both men were tossed around by the tempest while they attempted to refill the boiler. Somehow they were able to accomplish this, and both made it back inside. Albert Tessler then got the boiler lit, and slowly the boiler made steam. Then Charles ordered the anchor raised, and then gingerly eased on power to the propeller, and made 3 knots as they headed for the safety of Jones Island. He didn't want to go any faster, because of the strain it might put on the emergency repairs. At 7 a.m. that Sunday morning, the fishing boat Tessler slowly steamed into port. The entire population of Jones Island was standing along the shore, waiting for them and cheering as they pulled in. The boat was 12 hours overdue, and many feared it had been lost in the huge storm. As the villagers watched it make its entrance, they quickly saw that the entire boat was coated in ice. It looked like a giant ice cube. 2 years later, in 1915-16, the city of Milwaukee began proceedings to seize Jones Island from the fishing families that lived there in order to build the present-day port facilities located on the site. These proceedings followed nearly 20 years of legal battles between the Jones Island residents and the Illinois Steel Company that both claimed rights to the island. Charles and Albert saw what was coming, and they were the first to grab an available dock on the mainland at the foot of National Avenue to relocate their fishing business. Just a few years later, in 1919, Captain Charles Tessler, incredibly, actually moved his entire family home from Jones Island to 2722A South Shore Drive in Bayview. The word incredibly is used here because this move was accomplished likely without powered trains or truck transportation as we have today, probably all done by horses. Perhaps a better word is astonishingly. The entire home had to be lifted up off its foundation on Jones Island, loaded onto a scow, taken across the water, then somehow taken off the scow, and loaded, again somehow, onto a huge loading bed on wheels, and then pulled by horses up the big hill to reach 2722 South Shore Drive. It was, and had to be, a huge undertaking, but the move was accomplished without incident, and the original Tessler family home from Jones Island was installed successfully in the back of the property Charles appears to have already owned, taking the number 2722A South Shore Drive. Charles and the Tessler family moved in and lived in this house for many more years. It still stands today. It is Charles's move of this house to Bayview, while still captain of the fishing boat Tessler, and he continued to captain for nearly 2 more decades, that qualifies him as a Bayview Lake captain. His son Richard, who also later captained both the Tessler and then harbour tugboats, lived here with his father Charles for 20 years, and thus also became a Bayview Lake captain. There is a future episode coming up on this channel about Captain Richard Tessler. Not long after the successful house move, in 1921 Charles had to undergo a legal battle with the city to have plumbing installed. There was a claim that the existing lot wasn't zoned for 2 homes. The one in the front, that he appears to have owned previously, though this couldn't be confirmed, was said to be the only one allowed. But he overcame the opposition and prevailed. Charles Tessler went on ultimately to live and die in the rear former Jones Island house in 1939. His son and fellow Bayview Lake captain Richard also died there in 1956. It appears that Charles gave the front house on the lot at 2722 South Shore Drive to his daughter Ella and her husband Joe Miller. So it's very likely, though the front house isn't 100% confirmed, that both houses at 2722 and 2722A South Shore Drive were a Tessler family affair, with Ella in the front and Charles and Richard in the back, while they captained their family fishing boat Tessler as Bayview Lake captains. It was during this time, when Charles and Richard were living at this location in Bayview, that they had another escape from death on the lakes on 17th April 1927. That early morning, 7 a.m., was foggy. Charles was captain of the family fishing boat Tessler, with son Richard, brother Albert, and 2 other crewmen aboard. They were sailing in the thick fog in Lake Michigan, about 5 miles off Milwaukee, when they were struck by the car ferry Madison. Future Bayview Lake Captain Edward Martin of South Ellen Street was captaining the Madison at the time of the collision, and simply couldn't see the tiny fishing boat in the thick fog. It wouldn't be for another 20 years, after World War II, when radar began to appear on Great Lakes ships and even fishing boats. Both vessels in this instance were sailing blindly through the fog. At the moment of impact, Charles Tessler and his crew were thrown down onto the deck. Charles was cut by flying glass as he worked the helm. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. However, the Tessler was seriously damaged, though it didn't sink and made it back to port successfully. Charles Tessler married Anna Rempford, daughter of Jones Island fishing captain Charles Rempford, on Saturday, 26th November, 1892. They had 3 children, 2 sons, Richard and Erwin, and 1 daughter, Ella. As described previously, Richard crewed for his father for 30 years aboard the fishing boat Tessler, taking over from Charles in 1937 to himself become a Bayview Lake captain. Erwin did not go into the fishing profession, but lived in Bayview for many years. He served in the U.S. Army in World War I. Ella married Joseph Miller, a crewman in the 1930s, and probably earlier, on her father Charles Tessler's fishing boat Tessler. She grew up on Jones Island. Then, when Father Charles moved their family home from Jones Island to 2722A, South Shore Drive, in 1919, Ella and her family went on to live in the house in front of it, on the same lot that her father Charles appears to have owned previously. Besides fishing, Charles Tessler had also been a trustee of the Milwaukee Sharpshooters Association and sang in the Jones Island Choir. Captain Carl, Charles Tessler, heroic rescuer of fellow sailors, survivor of 3 accidents miles out on Lake Michigan that should have killed and or seriously injured him, subject of 3 page 1 and 5 feature articles in both Milwaukee newspapers over a period of 35 years, including one after his death, documenting his fishing and sailing exploits, and one of the old and great Jones Island fishermen that moved to Bayview after being kicked off the island along with all other Jones Islanders, and continued on as a lake captain, died in 1939 at age 73. He had retired 2 years earlier, in 1937, aged 71, due to illness. He had braved the elements and the rigorous job of being a fisherman and Bayview Lake captain all the way to age 71. His brother Albert, the fisherman engineer, died 9 years later, in 1948. Charles's wife Anna died 21 years before him, in 1918, and they are buried together in her ancestral Rempford family plot in Forest Home Cemetery. 3 children, Richard, Erwin, and Ella, who lived to age 100, are buried together at Arlington Park Cemetery. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. If you'd like to read more details about Captain Carl Charles Tessler, as well as the sources for the information contained in today's video, you can find these and more in the book Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, for sale now by individual volumes on both Amazon.com and HenschelHouseBooks.com. All proceeds from book sales go to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to contribute to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them. Please consider contributing to us through the listings found on our website under the Contribute button, as well as in the end credits at the conclusion of this video. Note, we are not a 501c3, so contributions are not tax-deductible. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. This is the only surviving intact ship that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case was captained by at least 2, and likely 3, totaling over 20 years between them. Finally, we also have free self-guided walking tours of Bayview's 71 lake captains' homes, using only your phone. It's simple and easy. Just go to our website shown here, find the item on the menu bar at the upper left named Free Self-Guided Walking Tours, and then scroll down to find the map with instructions. Zoom in by street. When you find a captain's house you're interested in, click on it and details appear on the right, along with a link to the YouTube episode from this channel that provides the biography of the captain that lived there. You can also read about his sailing adventures while living in that particular house by going to the website menu item, Sailing Adventures, and looking up his name. It's free, fun, and available any time you're out walking. Just bring along your phone. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.